Your jump to freelance starts here. Welcome to the Jump Moment.
Almost every creative that I talk to has a desire to make the jump to freelance, but not all of them do. And that was actually what my story was like for many years of my life. I actually didn't think that I would ever get the opportunity to make the jump to freelance until my jump moment. That's what this week's episode is all about. It's my story. It feels only fitting as the podcast kicks off to share my story. Who is this guy that's having these conversations? What is this guy's story? So for those who don't know, my name is Matt Curtis. I run a business called Lunchtime Heroes, and I'm also building a business called Jump to Freelance. And that's what this podcast is a part of. The Jump Moment is really designed to encourage and inspire you, those who are creatives pursuing freelance in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's on the horizon for you. It's something that you want. You're not quite sure how to get there. Maybe you've made the jump and you'd love some help building the foundations of making this successful over time. Well, this podcast exists to encourage you and to inspire you to make the jump and to keep working once you have. Before we get into my story, I want to talk about tools. This is a little bit of a different episode than normal because normally I'll be having a conversation that I can transition to. Today I'm transitioning back to myself. So you're going to hear me talk to me about me, which is a little bit breaking the format. But I always want to feature something on the front end of each show, whether that be a tool or even a resource. You could think of them as advertising, but they're going to be fairly protected in the sense that I don't want things on the show that are not going to be relevant to you or helpful to you. So this week I want to focus on what I've used for several years now, a service called Paperform. Paperform is a form building tool. So if you have a website, Squarespace, Wix, WordPress, whatever, you have access to some degree of forms through a variety of mechanisms. But often those forms are pretty simple and pretty limited. That's what I ran into early on in my business. And I had a very specific problem that I wanted to try to solve. My business, you'll hear a little bit more about it in a minute as we get to my story, but my business is focused on helping churches build a healthy creative ministry. And so health begins with diagnosis. If you don't know what the problem is, it's going to be really hard to get healthy. And so I recognized pretty early on that I was having a hard time in my conversations with ministry leaders. As I said, hey, let's get your ministry healthy. And they would say, what? I don't even know what that necessarily means. And so I really had to build some way to help them understand that quickly. And so I landed on an assessment. And the problem I kept finding was that assessment tools are really expensive. Fortunately, Paperform allowed for the complex logic that I needed in order to make the calculations accurate and really make the form powerful. It's so powerful, actually, that I use it as the first step in my conversations with clients. So when I'm talking with a ministry leader and I say, hey, I think the best step for us is to consider moving forward, let's start here. Let's start with an assessment so you can get a sense of how healthy the creative arm of your ministry is. And it'll also give us insight as to whether or not for future further conversations is going to be helpful and worthwhile. And it's been so compelling, actually, that I've landed clients in part because of the results that it yields. It added so much clarity to the process for them. So if you're doing something where an assessment would be helpful, or even where you have particular needs for forms that are more complex than the standard offerings, Paperform is a phenomenal solution. I'm going to include an affiliate link in the show notes. It will give me 10% off for the duration of time that you are a subscriber. But more importantly for you, it will give you 10% off for the life of the plan for as long as you're subscribed. So if you subscribe for 10 years, you'll have 10% off for the duration of time that you're subscribed. So it's a great affiliate structure. It's helpful for me if people do sign up because then it offsets some of the costs that I have. And then for you, it offsets costs as well. And something I want to call out, having tools like this and getting in as cheaply as possible is super valuable because it lets you be able to be profitable faster and not have to worry about continually, having this kind of bloat of services. That'll be something we talk about at some point for sure, because that's a common challenge that we face as we're building a business. Everything looks great. Everything looks interesting. So if you're not interested in a form tool, please don't do this. But if you find that this is something that's helpful for you, consider Paperform and consider that affiliate link. That would be helpful. Okay, so now that is out of the way, let's jump into the story of my jump moment. every episode is going to have a handful of questions that I walk through with my guests. And so I'm just going to go through this list of questions myself and share my story through this lens, just so you have a sense of what all of these episodes are kind of structured like. The first thing I love knowing is the background of these people who are on the show. Tell me about your business. Tell me about what you do. So for me with Lunchtime Heroes, I've alluded to it already. I help churches build a healthy creative ministry. Functionally, what that looks like is your creative ministry is probably going to be taking a lot of inspiration from design studios or major corporations that have kind of really robust communications, advertising, marketing types of industry or departments. So the good thing is that we can look to some of those organizations and learn from them. The bad thing is that a lot of what they do and how they do it doesn't translate to the church. So we need some sort of a translator, some sort of interface to happen. And the only reason I know this is because I served on staff at a church, at different churches, over the course of 16 years and was doing some creative ministry even before that. So I have a long history serving in creative ministry, and I have seen a lot of that dysfunction. I've seen a lot of that unhealthiness and toxicity, and really it's led to creatives burning out. And part of that issue is what my business solves, is let's have conversations about how we can bridge the gap between the leadership side of the organization and the creative side. So it's consulting, it's kind of healthy optimization of a business, of an organization structure, those types of things. I also do some creative work as well. And so I want to never stop being a practicing creative. That was something that was hard for me when I lost in a season of my career. So I do branding, I do graphic design stuff. In the church, it's kind of a unique smattering, those types of things. Like I'll design books fairly regularly. There's a thing called a series graphic, which is basically like a themed expression of a series of messages that will be communicated. So things like that. Graphic design is still something I love doing as well. So that's Lunchtime Heroes. That's what I do in my business. What did my life look like before I started my own thing? Was I always dreaming of freelancing? Oh boy, yes. Or was this something that kind of snuck up on you? I have always dreamed of being a business owner and starting businesses. Absolutely love it. Super enthralled with the concept of it, the freedom of it, the excitement built into it. I mean, thinking about business ideas is just nonstop for me. And so having a career not doing this has been complicated. It's been hard. In some cases, I've felt trapped in that I can't be doing this thing that I'm so excited to be pursuing. And so, I've always been dreaming about doing freelance. The follow-up question here is, what was that thing? Was there a specific trigger? Was there an event, a conversation, a realization? Like, what was it that made you actually make the jump? And so really what we're getting to here is, what was the jump moment? And for me, it was very clear. My wife was having some health challenges. My work did not provide insurance that would cover what she needed. Okay, time to jump. That was my jump moment. No if, and, or buts about it. That was the catalyst. One of the things that the conversation sort of leads to is what held you back from making the leap earlier, or making that jump earlier. And these two things are really important together for me. When we were first getting married, my wife had some health challenges that I knew would require insurance. Like it would be kind of a short-sighted and a foolish decision to not have insurance. Some people can navigate seasons through that, and I get it. For me personally, I would probably do that. I'd be okay to not have insurance for a stretch. It is risky, so that's not necessarily a recommendation, but I get it. That was not the case for us. It was not an option for us to approach life that way. And so for me, I always chose to pursue a path that allowed us or kind of facilitated insurance for us. And as the years have gone on, that's become more complicated simply because the landscape of what insurance looks like has changed over the years. And so what used to be really good coverage for not a lot of money out of pocket started evolving to become okay coverage with some money out of pocket. And so that whole thing had really begun to erode in our own lives and in our own experience. And then all of a sudden, it kind of exploded. And it really got to the point where we asked the question to each other, do we want to remain in this job and watch our savings drain? Or do we want to intentionally drain our savings for the purpose of building something that would allow us to have freedom in life like we haven't in the past? in a lot of ways for me to build a business, to give myself a chance to try it, to see if it'll work. And so that was the catalyst for us, both the thing that was the fear that prevented us, insurance, cost of insurance, all those kinds of things. And then the catalyst was, having a job doesn't solve this problem anymore. Got it. So now it's time to go. And so, yeah, that was really the big thing that held us back, was just the cost. Most of our lives was spent in California. In 2020, at the very end of the year, we moved to central Pennsylvania. So that also changed things because costs in California were quite a bit different than the way that things are structured here. And so both life circumstances, but then also, kind of proximity or location, like where were we now? We had a different set of options in front of us than we did in California, for sure. So that was a really big piece of it. The next question here is what finally helped you push past the fear or the challenges to take that first step? In a lot of ways for me, I try to be a planner. I try to be intentional about the decisions that I'm making. I want to try to make good decisions for me and for my family. This circumstance pushed us past decision making, and it really moved us into reaction. It was almost a crisis moment that we had to respond to. Neither path in front of us was a great option. If I'm totally honest, from a financial perspective, do you stay working for a company where they won't pay either where the insurance won't be enough so that you don't have to drain your savings? That's a bad solution, right? Well, the other option is, do you gamble? Do you roll the dice and all of your money maybe is at risk in the sense that now you have the success of your business to contend with. Now that's the thing that's going to determine if you can make it or not. Okay, well, that's kind of scary too. And so both options really felt like we're trying to find the lesser of the evils. And so, total honesty, like we kind of looked at each other, my wife and I were like, well, if we're going to go down, we might as well go down big, right? Let's pick the path that seems to give us the most flexibility, seems to offer the highest upside, because I know that the company I was working at wasn't going to offer me more money. That's never the solution. You know what I mean? And so it's like, well, if money's the problem, at least there's no cap going on my own. At least there's no kind of limit, in terms of how much I can make. And obviously there's a limit somewhere, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm going to be able to potentially earn as much as I need in order to cover costs in life. So that for me was like, man, that it was being removed from decision making and put into kind of crisis response reaction. That was really the key for us, because writing it all down on paper was still complicated, and we did that. We tried to do our due diligence, but it was the option of staying employed at a place just wasn't really smart anymore. And so that was it. That was the thing that pushed us over it. What's fascinating to me is, the more conversations I have with people who have made the jump to freelance, it's similar. There are some that are just sort of entrepreneurial in nature, but there are so many where the jump to freelance was a response. It was a reaction to a situation. And so I want you to hear that. For me, I was employed for, I don't know what it was, 20 years or something before I made the jump to freelance. And so I know that oftentimes there's a lament, at least for me, there was a lament building to say, oh man, I can't believe I'm never going to be able to do this. I can't start when I'm 30. I can't start when I'm 40. That's crazy. We have all these reasons or these kind of arbitrary rules, but the reality is that much of the time, this is a step out of response to a circumstance that happens in life. And so if you feel like you've been building for a while or wanting for a while or pining for a while, hey, your jump moment might be right around the corner. You never know. And it might be a circumstance. It might be a situation rather than you just deciding to quit your job and then make the jump. So that's a big part of it for me. Like that, what helped me take that first step to make the jump to freelance was a circumstance. Absolutely. And then the last thing here, what, if you could go back in time, what would you tell yourself? What piece of advice would you give your past self? It's a tough one because I think planning is important. I think being thoughtful and careful is important. But I'll tell you on the other side, all of the fears, all of the hesitations, all of the things that were roadblocks for me to make the jump to freelance, all of them have been navigated. Every single one of them. And they were not nearly as complicated as I had made them out to be in my mind. Not even close. The biggest thing for me, I've mentioned it a couple times, was health insurance. Okay, I'm thinking it's impossible to get health insurance on your own. Well, when we moved back to central Pennsylvania, I discovered that there's a marketplace here, and you talk to people, like actual human beings, and you say, here's my situation. Here are the doctors that I need to be seeing, or that, people in my family need to be seeing. What do I do now? And they walk you through the process. And for us, it was cheaper to get insurance this way than it was through a company. What? I have been afraid of making the jump to freelance for so many years because this was impossible. There was no way you could do it. It wasn't feasible at all. And here I am finding that it's almost the opposite. I'm thinking to myself, man, I don't know if I can afford to take a job now because insurance will be expensive. Like, it's crazy to me how big of a problem I had made the cost of insurance compared to what it's actually sort of revealing itself to be when I've put in the work to solve the problem. And so really the piece of advice that I'd give my past self is that, hey, if you have a problem in front of you, if you have a thing that looks like an impassable hurdle, just do some research on it. Just spend some time. Call some people to see how you can get insurance. Call the state or go on the website for the state. Google, how do I find insurance in my state? Do the due diligence to start deconstructing the problem, and you'll actually start seeing that maybe it's solvable. When we were in California, I was looking at what it would cost to have an LLC. It was $800 a year. Okay, that feels like a lot of money. And so for me, that felt like an impassable object, like there was too much. I can't overcome it. Well, now when I look at my business and I see an expense like $800 a year, I think, whew, that's a lot. But I know how I can pay for that because I've built momentum in my business to be able to help me pay for the cost of doing business. They're just costs. When you don't have a business yet, when you haven't made the jump yet, it feels like you're stealing money from a set number that you get as your salary, because that's what you're doing. But when you have a business, you can stack up your costs and begin seeing this just dictates how much work I need to find, how many clients I need to have, how many projects I need to execute on. It's not to say that it's just pulling levers and all of a sudden you have all of the money you need. But man, I really became immobilized because I wasn't willing to do any amount of work because fear stopped me. So I didn't do any work researching to solve these problems or to learn more or to understand. I didn't call a CPA and say, hey, I'm thinking about starting a business. What advice can you give me? Can I buy an hour of your time? And can you talk me through what it looks like for me to start a business? Like, I didn't do those things. And in hindsight now, the recommendation I'd give to my past self is, bro, come on, man. Like, just do some of that due diligence, because I'm finding that a lot of those things that I felt were overwhelmingly complex, they're not as complex as I thought they were. And that kept me from making the jump to freelance. I don't know where you're at as you listen to this episode. I don't know if you are considering making a jump to freelance. I don't know if you've been in freelance for many years now and you're just, enjoy hearing stories of how other people have made the jump. But I just want you to know that it's super possible to pull this off. Making the jump to freelance is very doable. And if this is something that you've really wanted to do for many years, but it just hasn't felt right, that's great. The time that you have right now is time that you're preparing for making the jump. Because ultimately, you never know. Your jump moment might be around the corner. So let's get you ready for it.
Thanks for listening to The Jump Moment. To find support for your jump to freelance, join our community at jumptofreelance.com.